Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast with us, the Eisen brothers at the Eisen Law Firm, where aviation law is all we do. Nothing else. You're here for what we do best, navigating the FAA Medical Certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. Around the office, we like to say, if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a frustrating process. So whether you are laughing at us or with us, join us, brothers, as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA Medical Certification. Today I have with me Anthony Eisen, pilot lawyer extraordinary.
That's a Diet Coke.
Dr. Alex Eisen.
Hello.
And myself, Christopher Eisen.
Yeah, you're here with yourself?
Well, you got to be with somebody.
Hey, listen, I was reading the script on this show. There's no script, but the title was FAA Medical Certification with a DUI.
DUI.
Boring.
Not boring at all. Somebody had a fun night.
Fascinating.
Wrong. So what's DUI stand for?
It seems to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There's like 8,000 variations.
I had an OWI. I had a DWI. I had a DUI. I had a DWAI. I had an OW. Did I say OWI?
I mean, you probably did, but there's probably another variation on it.
OWAI.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane how many variations there are.
Wish there weren't so many acronyms.
It's not, when I was a prosecutor, when I was starting out, I always wanted to refer to it as drunk driving. And oh my God, they would pretty much lay into you if you said the word drunk. It's not drunk, it's impaired. It's impaired driving. You don't have to be drunk to get the charge. You have to be impaired.
That's crazy.
Is technically correct.
Well,
indubitably.
Well, you don't have such a silly word. So, can you get a medical with a DUI history?
You bet your bottom dollar you can.
That's what it will take.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's just get into the nitty gritty. So you've had a DUI. Dang! I bet you didn't see that coming.
Grandma did, though. Let me cut to the gist for everybody
never had
here.
a DUI.
If you've been arrested,
You've got
just arrested. It doesn't matter if you were convicted.
We've had cases where they didn't even drop the case.
Yeah.
They
Even
arrested
if you were arrested and the prosecutor's like, nah, there's not enough here.
We're not even going to bring
Just
this case.
the mere fact that you were arrested is going to require a yes answer to question 18V Victor on the FAA Form 8500.
It's holy. If you've been arrested ever in your life for a DUI or any alcohol-related motor vehicle action, you need to say yes to 18V. I don't care if it was dismissed. I don't care if it was expunged. I don't care if it was sealed. I don't care if your grandma put it in a keepsake box and buried it 30 feet below her house. You have to report it because the FAA is going to find, and they're going to root, and they're going to dig, and they're going to find it. And then they're going to say, what is going on here? And they're going to revoke all your certificates, your ATP, your commercial, your seaplane rating, your, whatever you got, your choo-choo train, certificate. They're going to take it.
What I tend to find is that a lot of people that might be inclined to get a DUI are also somehow inclined to always aggravate somebody else in society to the point where they do a hotline complaint on them. Oh, I know that Johnny Smith over here didn't report his DUI.
They can find out about it that way. Somebody says, hey, this guy didn't report his DUI. There's not that these people are aggravating. A lot of great people get DUIs.
Sure.
That being said, this the hotline concern. There's the NDR, National Driving Register, whatever. NDR. National
You
Driver's
see it on the
Register.
application.
Yeah, it's out there. And essentially what that's getting at is they will ping your driving record from the NDR. Every application, in theory, they're pinging the NDR to see if they get a hit. They're out there actively rooting around to see if catch you in a lie. What is that?
That was my truffle pig.
You look like a truffle pig.
So if they find out about it, you didn't report it. You're
Plus, there's also,
Trouble.
if you have some other ancillary medical condition, it might somehow, somewhere be reported in your medical records
That's
that you had a
true.
DUI. And then they're looking for, your history of gallbladder or something like that.
What if I was convicted of reckless driving?
Well, now that's an entirely different question.
Well, I was arrested for DUI, but convicted of restless
Restless driving.
Well, sometimes it is restless driving. I was just very tired. That's why I didn't perform well on the field sobriety test. Well,
Happens to us all.
That's just, that's not the level of
Well,
humor we're looking to bring
no,
here.
no, we're not.
This is a family show for those with DUIs.
Point is, doesn't matter if you got convicted of a lesser included or a reduced charge of reckless driving. The fact remains you were arrested for driving under the influence, operating while impaired, driving while impaired,
All the soup kitchen.
whatever the soup kitchen may be.
Soup kitchen.
If there was an allegation by law enforcement that you were driving a motor vehicle while impaired
Okay.
due to
I think we
alcohol
get
or
the point.
drugs,
I think we get the
you got to
point. We
answer
gotta report
18V
it.
yes.
What's going to happen?
It's going to depend. If it's just a one-time DUI and it's like 0.08, something,
What do you mean 0.08? I don't know what that
well,
means.
your blood alcohol content,
What's that? The stuff they drew out of my blood?
yeah, that or whatever your breath. If you provided a breath sample or you had a blood draw and it resulted in a 0.08 blood alcohol content level, then chances are you could probably get by
There's no
pretty
chances.
easy.
There's no
I would
chances.
say so in the first one.
Well, sure.
Well, so there's
If
a
your
chance.
BAC's
So you're
under-
telling me there's a chance.
If your BAC is under 0.15, not
Sure.
0.08. 0.15 is what they're looking
Yeah,
at.
well, I'm just saying the higher you get up there,
Sure,
the
sure.
more scrutiny you're going to start
Sure.
incurring.
But once it hits 0.15, it's at 0.15.
Then you're in a world of hurt. There's going to be more scrutiny coming down.
Yeah. So under 0.15, here's what's going to happen. May I?
Well, I guess if you
not
must.
to act like I know more. I don't, but I've rehearsed this.
In the shower.
Okay. So if you have a DUI, the BAC is under 0.15. Here's what's typically going to happen. If you listen to the last podcast episode, you'll hear Christopher's largely elaborate and just detailed explanation about how everyone's a snowflake and how every case is different. That's what's going on here. Every case is different, but for the most part, if your BAC is under 0.15, you only have one DUI. Your application could still very well get deferred, which means the AME is going to send the application out to Oklahoma City for them to look at it and ascertain whether or not you meet criteria for substance abuse or substance dependence. The FAA is going to want to see an arrest report, final court disposition documentation, a personal statement from you regarding your past, present, and future plans for alcohol use, and your driving record, and any records relative to any treatment you received as a result of your DUI.
I bet people could take a relatively uncomplicated case where it's under 0.15 and complicate the ever-living snot out of it with their personal statement.
This personal statement is this, you could go from them waving you through with a BAC under 0.15 to, you've got substance dependence, sir or madam.
And if you have substance dependence, what are we looking at?
Substance dependence is a bit more involved,
Not just a bit.
quite a bit more involved. Rather than the FAA just waving you through, for substance dependence, you'd have to have a special issuance. And in order to get a special issuance, you have to establish that you are in recovery satisfactory to the federal air surgeon.
How do you get that? How do you obtain,
In order to obtain
satisfaction?
Satisfaction, you have to engage in typically an inpatient or intensive outpatient treatment, come out of that successfully, engage with a HIMSS AME, a specialized aviation medical examiner, to do ongoing monitoring and urinalysis or sober link to establish abstinence, while at the same time engaging in group aftercare and participating in AA type meetings, peer-to-peer meetings. Typically, they want to see 90 meetings in 90 days and then frequent engagement thereafter. Then they'll want you to have a psychiatric evaluation and a neuropsychological evaluation, at which point they will potentially give you your medical certificate if they feel everything looks good there. And then they'll require ongoing monitoring and engagement with your HIMSS AME and aftercare, psychiatric evaluations, AA meetings, and so on, for as long as you hold your medical certificate, although those requirements will quote-unquote step down over time.
All I'm hearing there is ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching.
Sounds like you're in chains.
Okay, whatever. So you mentioned that you could take a relatively, well, I guess I mentioned that you could take a relatively uncomplicated DUI situation where you might just get waved through, but in your personal statement, you could misstep, misspeak, and then suddenly have a substance dependence determination. Well, what is it that the FAA is looking at in order to make that determination? Are there criteria that they have to establish?
That's a beautiful setup.
Ooh.
In your lifetime, so per the regulation, right? So let me just back up. In the real world, you may not have a problem whatsoever. From a regulatory standpoint, the FAA's standard is different for substance dependence. Substance dependence isn't even a term that's used in the DSM-5 standard, which is the real world medicine
Clinical standards.
Clinical standards. The regulatory...
I got to call an audible on this play. Go to the doctor over here.
Don't use sports-related methodology. You know we don't...
Nomenclature.
You know we don't know anything about sports.
Clinical psychology, the right term there,
Clinical psychology, yes.
as opposed to regulatory psychology.
Yeah.
I mean, the
I think that's
regulatory-
something they just made up.
Regulatory criteria.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Anyhow.
So Part
continue.
67 defines substance abuse and substance dependence. Substance dependence, these in substance abuse are defined the same whether it's first, second, or third class medical application. For substance dependence, there's 4 criteria that the FAA looks at in your lifetime. Have you ever met one of these 4 criteria? Increased tolerance, manifestation of withdrawal symptoms, impaired control of use, and essentially continued use despite adverse effects. What does that mean for the personal statement? The one prong of impaired control of use, typically the FAA will consider binge drinking or drinking to blackout as meeting that criteria. Binge drinking or drinking to blackout would include essentially drinking 5 or more drinks in a sitting.
What is a sitting?
That's
you
a good
define
question.
that?
That's nebulous. So as an attorney, we're going to sort of argue what is a sitting and so on.
What's nebulous?
I don't know. It just sounded like an appropriate word to fix in there.
It's fugazi.
That's beautiful. So anyhow, if you go on your statement, start writing, hey, listen, man. Hey, listen, boss, man. I was out hog hunting last night. Sidestep from my usual frog fishing. Listen to the last podcast. You'll get that. So I stopped frog fishing. I went hog hunting, and I had 6 beers. You know, I usually drink 6 beers every time I go hog hunting, and that's about an hour's worth of drinking. The FAA is going to say that's impaired control of use, buddy. You're binge drinking. More likely than not, you know?
Get out of here.
If you're saying, hey, I'm drinking 12 drinks, you know, every night, or I'm just excessive alcohol use, they're going to say that's impaired control of use. I'm binge drinking. And the problem is a lot of people, obviously be honest with the FAA. For God's sake, be honest. But it's going to be one of those things where, what are you saying?
Yeah, you gotta temper your words.
Not
Yeah.
throttle, but
Well, yeah. I mean, you use good judgment and how you approach
Some
this
people
personal
will-
statement.
well, I think maybe I drank that amount. Well, you don't know how much you typically drink. I mean, don't put something out there unless you're confident in it.
Yeah. Don't be just putting random stuff out there because then you're gonna have to
Justify
that, which could be difficult or fatal to your entire case.
Fatal. So anyhow, that's why the statement's so important. And while I'm talking about it, let's go ahead and hit that increased tolerance.
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
So that's probably where the 0.15 comes into play.
That's correct. That BAC is, if you call me up right now and say I had a DUI, I would say, listen, what's your BAC? Asking the most important question.
First question.
That's why we buried it.
Oh,
in the
listen, it
podcast.
was my first time drinking. Okay, it hit me a little bit harder than I thought. I'm a lightweight, so I blacked out, and then I got in my car, got arrested, and I had a .2 BAC. But it's my first time. It's my first DUI. Shouldn't that count for something?
The real world diagnosis, the clinical diagnosis versus the regulatory criteria is so important. Sit down, Sean. Take your hat off. I'm about to teach you a lesson.
I'm about to school you.
Yeah. So this increased tolerance prong is so important. So important. The FAA is looking at the scale of the BAC. Anything under 0.15 is a one-time DUI. They're going to essentially say, hey, listen, don't do that again, unless you say something stupid in your personal statement, right? You're saying something to where, you're identifying this history that's problematic drinking, which, if that's the case, that's the case. But one-time DUI under 0.15, they're going to pretty much wave you through if they see everything they need to see. 0.15 to 0.2 is where things get a little bit dicey, right? So the FAA feels like once you hit 0.15, you should be getting close to a level of comatose. You shouldn't be demonstrating what they identify as a purposeful function, right? You shouldn't be able to get in your car, turn the car on, move the car down the road, communicate with law enforcement when they stop you, and so on and so forth. 0.15 is where they start to get suspicious of this concern. So if you have a DUI and your BAC is between 0.15 and 0.2, typically they're going to say, hey, listen, we don't like this. We're not going to necessarily say it's substance dependence, but we don't like it. So they'll identify that as substance abuse unless there's something else that indicates substance dependence. Once you hit 0.2, pretty much all bets are off for the most part. The FAA's concern is going to be, well, hey, listen, you were able to drive your car with the BAC of 0.2. You're able to communicate with law enforcement. You're able to do whatever it is you've done, at the police station and so on. That suggests a purposeful function. You shouldn't have been able to get your BAC that high such that you should be able to still be able to operate in somewhat of a normal capacity, albeit impaired. You shouldn't have been able to do that. We think you should have been comatose. You should be totally out of it. But because you've drank and drank and drank and drank more so over the course of your life, you've been able to have this purposeful function with your BAC at 0.2 or higher.
Well, listen, I don't drink that often.
That's an interesting observation about your life that I don't know what I can agree with.
I mean, listen, I don't drink that often. It was a one-time affair. And I don't think it was really 0.2
well,
or
the
above.
proof's in the pudding here, sweetheart. I mean, the number is kind of is what it is. And so, but then that's...
Was there any way we can back that down?
Perhaps. So here's what we could do. We could maybe look at, well, when did you consume your last alcoholic beverage? And at the time they took the BAC, was your BAC on the rise? Or was it on the decline? Was there some assessment as to what your actual function was at the time they took the sample? Did the law enforcement agents just pull you out of the car and make you blow, and you blew a 0.2 right then and there? I mean, at which point you were just done driving the car. It gets kind of dicey.
So what you're saying is that there might be some wiggle room for interpretation as to how that BAC value is actually viewed in terms of your purposeful functioning.
That's correct. However, once you hit 0.2, you're almost always in the dependence realm, and you're going to have to go through the HIMSS program.
What about, you mentioned 0.15 to 0.2 being maybe a substance abuse determination, but would there be a time period within a certain number of years where the DUI would have had to have occurred for that to be a concern for substance abuse? Or is that, because I believe substance abuse has a 2-year look back. So they look back 2 years from the date of a...
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. So, but let's say that DUI happened 5 years ago, but it was a 0.16. Would I still be considered in that substance abuse category?
Yeah, so substance abuse, like you said, per the regulations, identify a 2-year look back. So if you waltz in there and say, hey, listen, I got a BAC at 0.16, what's going to tend to happen is the AME is going to defer the application. The FAA is going to look at it and say, hey, we think this is substance abuse. Substance abuse is going to require for you to engage with a HIMSS AME for random urinalysis or sober length to prove abstinence and then have a psychiatric evaluation. It's a much more streamlined process that can be managed rather than the substance dependence process, which is much more in depth. However, what we like to do is typically if the DUI is 2 years old or older, we'll look at that and say, hey, listen, well, this is a BAC that would fall into the substance abuse realm. And as a result of the regulation, only having a 2-year look back, does this really meet criteria for substance abuse? Or do we need to have this airman established abstinence? I mean, per the regulation, that would be an appropriate analysis, in my opinion. It's something we've been successful with before, but
Let's say you have more than one DUI, but they were all under 0.15. Let's say over the course of 10 years, you've had 2 DUIs. It's been 5, 6, 7 years since your last DUI. You're applying for a medical certificate for the first time. You answer yes to 18V because you've had a history of arrests for DUI. You put down what it was, when it was. Your BAC was under 0.15 in both occasions. Is that going to be a problem as far as getting a medical certificate?
I believe so.
Oh, boy.
So the concern here is essentially whether or not that would meet criteria for continued use despite adverse effects. So continued use despite adverse effects is one of those, that fourth criteria for substance dependence. The FAA's position, and of course I'm not speaking for them, but my perception is based off of dealing with these cases on a regular basis. The FAA's position is that once you get one DUI, you need to stop drinking rather than continuing to drink, which would suggest this continued use despite adverse effects, such that you get a second DUI. Right, so if you have more than one DUI, typically they're going to try to turn it into substance dependence. But there is some nuance to that language of the regulation that we can argue to say, if you were to really expand what the regulation actually says is continued use despite damage to physical health or impairment to social, occupational, or personal function. So it gets somewhat nuanced into say, well, was there damage to physical health despite the 2 DUIs? And was there impairment to social, occupational, personal function? We have certainly seen cases where there have been more than one DUI for an airman or more than one alcohol-related event that have gone back decades. The FAA has said, okay, well, you're good to go. Haven't required the monitoring and so on.
I think the FAA likes to say, though, well, you got these legal consequences because of the DUI, so that's continued use despite adverse, I suppose, personal function or somehow they try to pigeonhole that language in there because of the 2 legal repercussions vis-a-vis the arrest.
I would say that's an accurate description of what goes on. Really, at the end of the day...
I got another one, though. Before the day ends. Before the day ends.
By all means.
4 days in. What if you don't give them a breath sample or blood sample? Let's say you refuse.
How could we have forgotten that?
Oh, my gosh.
You refused?
I refuse.
I don't refuse the answer to that one.
I'm a sovereign citizen. I'm not kidding.
What is that even?
We can wait someone call in and tell us. The lines are open.
Oh my gosh, the lines are just flooded with nothing. So let me say this much. If you get refused, they're going to put you down as substance abuse. Want to know why? They don't know what that BAC was.
Well, does it matter when it happened, though? 2 years?
Potentially. I mean, it's still the 2-year argument. But a refusal is almost always going to go to substance abuse unless you make the 2-year argument, and they're going to require the monitoring and so on. So a refusal or anything 0.15 up to 0.2, but not including 0.2, is going to be abuse. 0.2 and higher is dependence. Under 0.15 is nothing. More than one DUI is dependence, more likely than not.
So there's a variability of
variability.
Outcomes. Yeah.
Variance.
A variance.
Which is it, college?
It is whatever you want it to be. That's how college is nowadays.
That is beautiful.
There is no right or wrong answer.
That's beautiful. You like that out there?
I do.
So that kind of covers the whole DUI. It's doable. But
you can almost always get a medical. You could have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 DUIs. It's just a matter of, are you going to be able to show satisfactory recovery to the Federal Air Surgeon standards?
Let's say that you do that. Then what are the next steps? Like, are you on a special issuance or are you just on
you're going to be on a special issuance.
If you have the 10 DUIs.
Yeah, you're gonna be on a special issuance, and then eventually they consider you for the step down, so you're doing less and less as time goes on. But there's also a regulation that sort of suggests that if you have that many DUIs, it's probably not going to work just from a certificate standpoint, but unlikely you're going to have 10 DUIs.
Would you say then that even if it's a first-time DUI, second-time, third-time DUI, within reason, of course, that it's probably in the applicant's best interest to have representation as it goes through this process?
Listen, why would you have an attorney involved in something like this? For God's sake, I just paid him $10,000 to get my DUI down to a reckless driving.
I think, whether it's us or some other...
Can you commit? Is it I think or I know? Can you commit?
I'll commit, but I won't commit for you.
You should be committed. Let me say this much. Absolutely need to have an attorney involved because we know how to get the records. We know what they're wanting to see. You know these ins and outs, and we can present it in a way to hopefully get you your medical certificate rather
streamline it.
Yeah. I mean, what do you want me to do? Submit the application, wait 4 months for them to come back and say, send us all your records, and then, okay, another 4 months.
I want to be proactive in the matter.
For the love of all that's holy.
And you don't want to misstep and create a bigger issue where there wouldn't otherwise need to be one.
That is absolutely right.
So the time and energy and hassle.
Is this a doctor thing?
Doesn't sound like it. Sounds like
it's a regulatory.
I'm
talking about a regulatory matter based off of criminal infractions.
Yeah. Sounds a lot like a legal matter to me, son.
By golly goo.
Well, I think that pretty much.
I gotta get out there and get to my frog fishing.
Frog fishing? Well, you look like you could use a beer.
I don't drink alcohol. That's the silly part.
If you did, it'd be Bud Light. Go ahead.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for today.
The final approach thing.
We overshot the final approach. We overshot. Now we're coming back around.
Flared out here and flaming out now.
Left downwind. Well, you've logged.
Makes sense.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Be left downwind.
Go ahead.
Field. Coming in the base.
Left downwind. You've been left.
Here's final.
Behind. Go ahead.
You don't want to be downwind to me. Well, you've logged another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. And even though our wives deny they know us in public, we are the Ison brothers of the Ison Law Firm. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.